In this lecture, we will focus on combating procrastination tendencies and how self-worth theory explains how we avoid failure. Before we jump into a discussion on procrastination, let's remember that procrastination and time management are not one and the same. Although both can impact the use of time, the root causes of each are very different. Procrastination is an issue of will and is related specifically to starting tasks, meaning procrastination is a motivation issue because it impacts our active choice of behavior. A learner who is procrastinating may understand how to best prioritize tasks and manage their time, but may not feel like starting the tasks they have planned. If they are not able to effectively manage their affect, they will keep putting off the tasks. Again, it is important to note that the key difference between time management and procrastination is that time management is an issue of skill, while procrastination is an issue of will. In this unit, we will focus on procrastination. Let's visit Covington and Roberts' quadripolar model of need for achievement. A student's ability is repeatedly tested in school, and over a period of time, two different dispositions are developed: a motive to approach success and a motive to avoid failure. These motives function throughout all areas of our life. Essentially, some people are hypothesized to undertake things in order to be successful, and others primarily to avoid being a failure. The outcome may sometimes be almost the same, but the underlying motivational context and the whole personal experience of pursuing one of the goals is very different. While one student approaches a task from the excitement of potential success, the other is doing his best to avoid the inevitable failure. However, these two are not totally independent from each other. They do interact. That is, sometimes people are motivated by both a desire for success as well as a desire to avoid failure, with each motive being either high or low. These interactions form the table presented in this slide. We can use this table to categorize four different types of students: the success-oriented students, the overstrivers, the failure avoiders, and the failure acceptors. Where do you think procrastination lies? In order to find the answer, you have to ask yourself, what is the nature of procrastination at its core? Procrastination is essentially an unresolved or only partially resolved approach avoidance conflict. We want or need to do or approach something, but for some reason we avoid it. So procrastination shows up as avoidance behavior. With that in mind, where would you place it in this model? If you guessed failure avoidance, you were almost 100% correct. While we would place procrastination in the failure avoider category because the motive to avoid failure is very high and the motive to approach success is very low, we also have to place part of it in the overstriver category. Thinking about what you read in the Sapadin book, How to Beat Procrastination in the Digital Age, we know that perfectionism can also be a form of procrastination. While perfectionists would most likely be placed in the overstriver category, we have to acknowledge that a perfectionist's tendency to overwork due to the high expectations they place on themselves is in itself a form of procrastination. Now we know that procrastination results from a high motive to avoid failure. So why is failure so scary? Why do we avoid it? What's the big deal if we fail the test, lose the debate, or don't get an A on the paper? Why does it matter? What will be affected? According to Covington, students who have a high motivation to avoid failure, like failure avoiders and overstrivers, often do so because failure would affect their sense of self-worth. Covington states that the motive for self-worth is the universal desire for self-acceptance. This includes a desire to establish and maintain a positive self-image and to feel successful. As humans, we all want to feel good about ourselves. Yet the high value our society places on success makes failure result in feelings of unworthiness, hopelessness, and self-rejection. To avoid these negative emotions, students who have a high need to avoid failure use procrastination to protect their self-worth. How so? Let's look at a formula that explains two things. One, how academic performance impacts our self-worth, and two, how we use procrastination to protect our self-worth. Self-worth equals ability equals performance. What does this mean? An easier way to understand it is to read it in the reverse. Performance is a direct reflection of our ability, and our ability determines our self-worth. Meaning, if we perform at a high level, such as acing the test, winning the debate, or getting an A on the paper, it is assumed to be a direct reflection of our high ability. And as students, when we believe we have a high academic ability, it results in high self-worth. This sounds great, right? But what does it mean if we don't perform at a high level? What if we fail the test? Our failure is believed to be a direct reflection of our low ability, and the belief that we have a low ability results in a low self-worth. So we said students use procrastination to protect them from having a lowered self-worth. But what does this look like? Procrastination breaks down the relationship between performance and ability. But how? When we procrastinate, self-worth is still based on ability, but ability is no longer equal to one's performance. Meaning, if a student failed a test but only studied the night before or the morning of, it is not a direct reflection of their ability. In this way, the student can rationalize, I would have gotten a better grade on the test if I studied more. So it's not that I couldn't get an A, but I just waited till the last minute to study. This conclusion breaks the relationship between the academic performance and the student's ability, in turn protecting their self-worth. Ironically, in an effort to avoid failure, the student failed. Self-worth theory contends that the protection of a sense of ability is the student's highest priority, higher sometimes even than good grades. Stemming from that, students may actually handicap themselves by not studying in order to have an excuse for failing that does not reflect poorly on their ability. Instead, it will reflect on their lack of effort, which is a more acceptable reason to fail than failing because one lacks ability. In our Western society, ability has a much higher value than effort. Think about it. Which would you rather hear if you got an A on a major exam? Good job, you are so smart. Or, good job, you worked so hard. In our society, seeing ability as the reason for success increases self-worth more than seeing effort and hard work as the reason for success. There is also a powerful difference in emotional reactions between failing for effort versus failing for a lack of ability. The difference also motivates students to protect their self-worth. The emotion we experience if we fail for controllable reasons, such as staying out too late the night before a test, is guilt, while the emotion we experience if we fail for uncontrollable reasons, such as failing a test even though we studied for a whole week, is shame. The beliefs associated with guilt are very different than the beliefs associated with shame. When we experience guilt, we say to ourselves, I made a mistake. This reflects the association we have between guilt and a lack of effort. But with shame, we say to ourselves, I am a mistake. This is the self-rejection we experience when we believe we lack ability. Although guilt is not a warm and fuzzy feeling, we would much rather feel guilty than the worthlessness of shame. In this way, it is not the failure that we are avoiding, but the shame associated with it. And in order to avoid shame at all costs, students will procrastinate so they fail the task for a lack of effort. So, are you a procrastinator? Research shows that 70 to 90% of Western college students engage in procrastination, with 20% having a chronic issue. Here are some common behaviors and beliefs that procrastinators struggle with. Procrastinators often overestimate the time that they have left to perform tasks. They also underestimate the time it takes to complete the tasks. The underestimation of the amount of time a task will take coupled with the belief that they have plenty of time to complete the task, is a recipe for disaster. Next, procrastinators often overestimate how motivated they will feel the next day, the next week, the next month, etc. They tend to feel like tomorrow will hold unlimited ideas, focus, and motivation. Procrastinators also think that succeeding at a task requires that they feel like doing it. On the contrary, the most successful students are able to motivate themselves to do the tasks they do not feel like or want to do. Lastly, procrastinators believe that working when not in the mood is suboptimal. But if we waited to start tasks until we felt like doing them, we would hardly ever get anything done. Although procrastinators usually have all the tendencies listed here, students have different reasons for engaging in procrastination. On the next several slides, we will take a look at the 6 different procrastination personality styles that help us to better understand what may be the cause of our need to avoid failure through procrastination. When it comes to completing tasks, the perfectionist tends to do all or nothing. If students are perfectionists, doing nothing can protect their illusionary ability, but doing all or overworking can push them to both procrastinate completing the task as well as ignoring or putting off the start of other tasks. Dreamers feel that they have little real achievement in life, so they compensate for it by having grandiose dreams. Of course, the bigger the dream, the less likely that one will accomplish it, but they can blame lack of success on the big nature of the dream. They also tend to believe in fate, absolving themselves of having to actually do something. A dreamer may say to themselves, "It just wasn't meant to be." The worrier suffers from constant worry of, "What if I will not be able to handle it?" The "it" can be a difficult class, a presentation, a new job, etc. There is a fear that change would reveal some inability they have. Worriers also like for others to make decisions, so if things fail, it doesn't affect their self-worth. The defier feels that someone telling them what to do is a threat to their self-worth. They may not feel special, so they use blatant defiance or passive-aggressive behavior to make themselves feel special. Crisis makers try to make themselves feel better by gaining the glory of succeeding at the last minute, or not looking very bad if they fail as a result of less than total effort. Crisis makers create crises to get noticed, since otherwise they have feelings of powerlessness. Lastly, the pleaser has a difficult time saying no. Pleasers tend to suffer from a low sense of self-worth, which compels them to take on more work than they can reasonably handle. Since they do not feel that they are enough by just being who they are, they feel the need to validate themselves by doing a lot, that is. Still, they can be plagued by feelings of unworthiness. So now that we have gone over the 6 different procrastinator personality styles, as well as some of the reasons students procrastinate, let's find out what we can do about it. We will now review research-based procrastination elimination strategies. First, because procrastination has a motivational root, setting SMART goals is one way to help avoid procrastination. Another good strategy is to practice time telling, or estimating the amount of time it takes to complete a task. Procrastinators often underestimate the amount of time to complete tasks, so cultivating a realistic understanding of how much time is needed to complete different tasks is helpful. For instance, you might find it takes you longer to read through certain types of material than others, such as an empirical article taking longer to read than a chapter in a book. Using prompts or reminders to help you get started on a task is also helpful. You may set an alarm 15 minutes before your regular study period to get mentally prepared to engage in learning. Rewarding yourself when you have met your goals can be a great way to regulate your behavior. The bits and pieces approach, or breaking larger assignments or tasks into smaller ones, can help you feel less overwhelmed. For example, if you set a goal of completing the title page, introduction, and reference page for a paper you have been anxious about starting, This may feel much less intimidating than just setting a goal to finish your paper. The 5-minute plan can also be helpful by tricking you, so to speak, into starting a task. Especially with procrastination, it is getting started that can be the hardest part, whether it's starting a new chapter in a book or staring at the cursor on a blank screen. If you tell yourself that you will just work on something for 5 minutes, you will likely go beyond working for those 5 minutes since you've gotten over the biggest hurdle of getting started. We can also shoot for 80% completion. Experiment with standards for success to test core beliefs and avoid catastrophizing. Instead of aiming for 100%, try for 80% or 90% to see that the world doesn't end when you're not perfect. Social support is also key to eliminating procrastination. Make friends with classmates who are self-regulated. Also, there is really nothing like having a publicly stated goal to help you get started, so that you keep your word and don't put off starting tasks. Another great way to reduce the fear of failure that fuels procrastination tendencies is to recognize that you are worthy as a person for who you are and not only for what you do. Don't let academic performance be the sole source of your self-worth. There are many other areas of one's life that can generate self-worth, such as real and truthful relationships with family and friends, giving of yourself, such as volunteering, dedication to your faith, expertise in a sport or the fine arts, or mastery of a valued hobby. Lastly, challenging procrastination beliefs is a great way to prevent yourself from avoiding tasks. As we've heard in previous units, becoming aware of and disputing irrational beliefs is an important part of changing the way we think about activating events, such as a difficult exam. And changing our thinking by disputing procrastination beliefs is imperative when we're trying to change our emotional and behavioral consequences. In the next few slides, we will review why creating SMART goals is an effective way to increase our motivation and combat procrastination. What does research say about goals? Research has shown that our actual performance will strive to meet the goal that we set. We may not complete the goal, but let's look at the alternative. In the absence of a goal, there is simply nothing there to motivate us to do better. We have no reference point to strive for, and it's almost as if our performance flatlines or can even decrease over time. But how and why do goals work? In educational psychology, we look at factors that we can measure, such as effort, duration or persistence, direction of attention, strategic planning, and reference point. When we have a goal to focus on, it tells us where our attention should be directed. And when we know where we're going, we often create a strategic plan to get there efficiently. Research has shown that when we have goals, we tend to put out more effort and we persist longer when we are faced with obstacles. We also have a reference point, so we know where we are in relation to our goal at any given time. This allows us to adjust our strategic plan or to evaluate the amount of effort we need to give in order to reach our goal. For example, if you had a paper due in a week and you set a goal to create the title page, the bibliography, and to write the introduction, you would be much more likely to get more done than if you just said, I'm going to work on my paper for an hour. You could create a strategic plan and put those 3 tasks in priority. You would always know at any given point while you were working how far away you were from being done. Your working memory would have a direction to focus on. You would know that you wouldn't need to worry about the body of the paper or wrapping it up at this point, but that you were just trying to get a head start, and that you could think about the content of your paper more globally so that you can write an introduction as opposed to focusing on the details of the paper. Chances are you would persist through any obstacles or distractions and put more effort into completing your goal because you could see the end point. So now that we know how and why goals work, let's figure out how we can write some effective goals. The most effective goals are SMART, meaning they are specific, measurable, action-oriented, realistic, and timely. Specific goals are written in as much detail as possible. Our subconscious mind needs to have a very clear representation of our goal. It is almost like visualization, which again is extremely powerful in programming our minds. Also, the more specific our goals, the easier it is for us to determine the best way to get there. Along with being specific, goals also need to be measurable. We need to know exactly where our goal is, whether or not we've made our goal, whether we've just missed it, or if we've passed it up. Remember that our goals are reference points. We should always know where we are in relationship to our goal. Our goals should also be action-oriented. Remember what we said about intention when speaking about motivation. In order for us to be motivated to pursue a goal, we need to have active choice. We need to actively engage in behavior in pursuit of our goal. Goals also need to be realistic. We need to believe in our goal at a conscious level, otherwise our subconscious mind won't believe it and it will not work in pursuit of the goal. This portion of writing a SMART goal is very idiosyncratic. What may be realistic for you may not be realistic for others, and what may be realistic for you today may possibly not have been realistic for you last week, or may not be realistic for you next week. This portion of writing effective goals should not be underestimated. You need to believe in your success in attaining the goal 100%. Otherwise, your mind will not work at 100% to help you get there. Lastly, our goals need to be timely. This not only allows us to fight procrastination, but it also gives us a deadline, a point in time when we need to stop, look around, and see if we made it. Did we reach our goal? Did we almost get there, or did we overshoot it? Let's reevaluate. What is our next goal going to be? Do we need to raise the bar on ourselves, or do we need to come up with a better strategy? So let's take a look at some goals next and see if we can spot whether or not they're smart. Take a moment to read these 3 goals. Are they smart? Are they specific, measurable, action-oriented, realistic, and timely? While all 3 of these sentences are goals, there are words within them that make them less than effective, and there are certain aspects that are missing. Let's take a look at the first one. I want to try to learn how to study better. What words within this goal make it less than effective? If you guessed to try and better, then you are correct. Although this sounds like a goal, the words to try make it seem as though the person writing this goal is less than committed. But let's take a closer look at the word better. What exactly does better mean? How would you know if you learn to study better? How much better do you want to learn to study? Does this mean you want to use the same strategy and just use it at an earlier time and study more overtime instead of cramming? Does this mean that you want to use different strategies or possibly create a study group? There's no real way to measure whether or not this goal was achieved because it's not specific enough. So let's take one of these less than effective goals and make it smart. Take a minute to pause your video and see if you can change this into a SMART goal. I want to get good grades by studying harder. You've probably guessed that the words good and harder are not conducive to an effective goal. In order to make this a SMART goal, we need to make a goal that is more specific and measurable. What exactly do we mean by good? For each individual person, good is going to mean something different. And again, good grades in one class can be very different from good grades in another. Also, what do we mean by studying harder? Does this mean putting in longer hours or studying with a group? These are details that you're going to want to work out before you write your goal down and put it next to your nightstand or on your wall. We want our minds, both conscious and subconscious, to have a very specific point in which we're working toward. So here is one version of turning this goal into a SMART goal. I want to obtain a 3.5 GPA this semester by setting aside 2 hours per day to study in a quiet environment. You can see that this goal is specific, is measurable, is action-oriented, realistic, and timely. Here's a color-coded version of this goal so that you can see that all of the aspects of a SMART goal are present. First of all, it is specific and measurable. We have a specific GPA here of 3.5, and GPA itself is measurable. We have action steps in place. This imaginary student says that he wants to set aside 2 hours a day to study in a quiet environment, so that he's not only prioritizing studying, but also regulating his environment. In the green, you see that there is a deadline for this goal, that the end point of this goal is at the end of the semester. This is a time when our imaginary student will stop and evaluate his outcome. Did he reach his goal? Did his plan work? Does he need to adjust his strategies? This part of the process will allow him to reflect on his previous goal in order to better plan for his next goal. Lastly, the realistic part of this goal is not able to be verbalized. Again, this portion of a SMART goal cannot be underestimated. Its importance is very high, but this is the part of the SMART goal that needs to be evaluated not only from person to person, but also from context to context. All of our goals should be derived from our values. Our values are the why of our behavior, the reasons why we do the things we do. Our long-range goals are the what. What would you like to accomplish in the future? What career do you want to pursue? But the important part for self-regulation especially is the how. The intermediate goals or the daily tasks are the action plan. These are how we are going to accomplish the long-range goals that we see in our future. How we're going to start our own business, how we're going to get into graduate school, how we're going to become a scientist, how we're going to write the next best screenplay. In order to be self-regulated learners, our daily tasks, our weekly tasks, and the things that we do on a semesterly basis need to be moving in the direction of our long-term goals. So what does this look like? Let's look at some examples of the 3 levels of goals, starting from the broadest, the long-term goals. Long-term goals take a year or years to accomplish. Oftentimes our long-term goals are goals in the future from 1 to 5 years away. These goals are very broad. There is a lot of planning and multiple intermediate and short-term goals that need to go into accomplishing a long-term goal. Some of your long-term goals may be what you would like to do after graduation, whether it's going to graduate school, obtaining your dream job, starting your own business, moving across the country or to the other side of the world. But regardless, these goals often take a lot of planning and many other separate goals to achieve them. An example of a long-term goal is, by fall 2017, I want to get accepted into the USC Cinematic Arts Master's Program by earning an overall GPA of 3.5. Intermediate goals take weeks or months to accomplish. This may be a semesterly goal that you have, or a goal to accomplish at the end of the month. An example of this type of goal is, by the end of this semester, I want to earn a 3.35 GPA in all of my classes by creating representations to help me learn new information. And lastly, we have short-term goals. These are also called performance goals or daily tasks. Daily tasks are done on an hourly or daily basis. They are very specific and can often be the step-by-step process to how we achieve our intermediate and long-term goals. An example of this very specific type of goal is, by the end of this week, I will create 2 or more effective matrices for Chapter 6 in CTWR 206A by comparing and contrasting the information I study. As you can probably see, these goals are not separate, and they in fact are all aligned. The short-term goal of engaging in more effective learning strategies will ultimately help the student obtain their intermediate goal of earning a 3.35 GPA. This is a step in the right direction for obtaining their overall goal of a GPA of 3.5 by fall 2017. As self-regulated learners, it is not only important that our long-term goals are derived from our values, but that our short-term goals and intermediate goals are aligned with and supporting our long-term goals. Again, our intermediate and short-term goals are the how we are going to get there step by step, how we are going to accomplish our long-term goals.
Without these specific daily tasks and weekly or monthly goals, our long-term goals would remain only aspirations.
It's important to mention that when we are trying to combat procrastination, it's the short-term goals, the daily tasks, the hourly tasks that will help to manage our affect. If you are struggling with procrastination, try to make your goals even more timely. What will you do in the next hour? What will you do in the next 15 minutes? Give yourself a deadline. Be specific. Make it measurable. And be realistic. Finally, as you are learning this week, reflect on these questions. On what tasks do you procrastinate? What may be the real issue? How do you protect your self-worth? Which procrastination personality style do you mainly engage in? What does this imply about why you avoid failure? What procrastination elimination strategies could you implement to combat procrastination tendencies? And lastly, do you have short-term and intermediate goals? Are they SMART?